Hello, welcome to Explorer Classroom. My name is Gina Borgia, and I am so glad you are joining us today. Many viewers around the world are celebrating Ramadan, and we wish you a special time of celebration. At National Geographic, we know the power of exploration, wonder, and storytelling can change the world. This Explorer Classroom YouTube show connects students around the world with our National Geographic Explorers for short lessons and time for your questions. Today, our explorer is Kasim Rafiq. Kasim is a wildlife ecologist who blends ecology, conservation, and technology in his research of big cats in Africa. Though he's from Scotland, he travels to Botswana and the Okavango River Delta in Africa and works in Washington State. Besides traveling for his work and studies, Kasim collaborates with others at the Botswana Predator Conservation Trust and his lab at the University of Washington. Through teamwork, field visits, and education, Kasim and his teammates are helping protect incredible creatures like lions, wild dogs, and cheetahs. But before we get into today's lesson, let's welcome our viewers who registered in advance and are joining us today from around the globe. Our shout outs go to the Eugene School District 4J, Ridgecrest Elementary School, Stuart M. Townsend Elementary, Barker Middle School, Hatch School, Montessori, 191 Virtual, Curtis Fundamental Elementary, Ibra Homeschool, Perkiomen Valley School District, OCSB, the Waterloo Community School District, Evergreen Elementary, Ardenwood Elementary, Sackville Heights Elementary, IBIME, Hope School, the Higgins Middle School, Lineville Elementary, the Taylor family, and all of our homeschools out there. We are so thrilled to have you here. And with that, let's get this Explorer Classroom started. It's time to turn it over to Kasim to share all about studying big cats in the wild. Take it away.
All right. Hi, everyone. It's nice to see so many people and meet so many new people. So I've got lots of pictures and videos to show you today. So let me share it. All right, so like Gina said, I'm a wildlife scientist and I study the behavior of big cats and dogs in Africa. So that means I look at things like where are they moving? Why are they going to those places? What are they doing when they get there? And today I'm going to tell you a little bit about what it's like to be a wildlife scientist, why it's really, really important to study animal behavior, and some of the tools that scientists like me use to watch animals when those animals think that they're alone. Now, I want to start with just a question. So we can give groups of animals lots of different names, and we can give them those names based on how they look or the things that they do. And I study a group of animals called carnivores. So I just want to get an idea of if anyone knows what that word means. So if you know what a carnivore is, just pop your hand in the air so I can see. All right, cool. There's some of you. So carnivores are animals that eat meat, and they occur all across the world. So from wolves and pumas in the Americas to lynx in Europe, tigers in Asia, or even sea otters in the oceans, carnivores come in all shapes and sizes, and they're all across the planet. And they have these really, really important roles that they play in the systems that you find them in. So without carnivores, in a lot of cases, the natural systems that you see when you go on your walks, so when you go into your natural parks or when you go on holiday or when you go diving in the ocean, these systems would be completely different. So carnivores are super important, and I study carnivores in Africa, and I study the biggest carnivores. So these are some of the animals that I study. Now, I'm going to give you like 5 or 10 seconds. Just want you to look at these pictures and see if you know any of the names of these carnivores. And then I'm going to run you through them in a few seconds. All right, so first up, we have African wild dogs. So African wild dogs are one of Africa's most endangered large carnivores. We think there might be less than 2,000 adults left in the wild. And for context, there's less African wild dogs in the wild than there are Starbucks in the US. In fact, there are 7 times more Starbucks in the US than there are African wild dogs left in the wild. Next, we have spotted hyenas. So these ones have a bit of a bad reputation from films like The Lion King and Jumanji, but they're actually super interesting and they're very, very intelligent animals. So hyenas live in these social groups called clans. And although lots of people think they're scavengers, which would mean that they just take whatever food they can find, in reality, they're very, very, very good hunters. This animal probably doesn't need too much of an introduction. It's an African lion, and this is the male lion that you can see, and you can tell from that big mane that it has around its neck. So male lions are Africa's biggest large carnivore. So they weigh over 400 pounds, which is 190 kilograms in the metric system. So that's more than twice the weight of your average adult in the US. So they're pretty huge. And then next, we have two animals that look very, very similar. So one of them is a cheetah and the other one is a leopard. Now, I've shown these pictures to my friends lots of times, and a lot of the time they can't tell the difference between the two of them. So I want to see how many of you know the difference between these two animals. So which of these animals do you think is a cheetah? And which of these animals do you think is a leopard? So if you think the one at the top is a cheetah, just comment in YouTube or stick your hand up so I can see. All right. And if you think the one at the bottom is a cheetah, stick your hand up. Okay, cool. So the one at the top is in fact the cheetah. So it's kind of hard to tell them apart sometimes because they have these spotty style patterns on their bodies. So they're relatively similar if you don't know what these animals are. But a really, really good way to tell them apart is by looking at the black tear marks on the cheetah's face. So leopards don't have these distinctive marks. Cheetahs do. So if you see that, you know you're looking at a cheetah. Otherwise, it's probably a leopard. So these are all of the animals that I study in my work, and they all eat meat. So they're all carnivores. Now, The Lion King is probably one of my favorite films. And if you've ever seen The Lion King, you might remember that in the film, lions and hyenas, they don't really get along. And that's also true in real life. And it's true for a lot of these different animals. So they live in similar places, they like to eat similar foods, and sometimes they use the same travel routes. And if we're being honest, they really, really don't like each other. So the wild dogs and the lions, for example, they really don't like each other. Sometimes they'll fight, sometimes they'll steal each other's food, and they can even kill each other. And because the lions are so big, when these different animals meet, the lions will probably win any fights. And that essentially means that some of the smaller animals, like the wild dogs, will change their behaviors and the way that they act so that they can avoid meeting some of the bigger ones, like the lions. So they can, for example, avoid going to places where lions hang out, so they don't meet them there. And they can also change when they're awake, so that they only come out to hunt and to feed and to play when lions are asleep. Now, these are just some of the ways that these animals can change what they do to live beside each other. And this is one of the things that I look at with my team. So we ask questions like, what are all of the different ways that these animals can coexist in the same place by changing their behaviors? And how is this being impacted by things like climate change? But why is it even important to study animal behavior in the first place? I don't think it's immediately obvious. So I want to explain with an example. So how many of you have a pet? Or how many of you have met someone with a pet? Maybe your friend has one. All right, so it's most of you. And how many of you have played with a dog? Okay, cool. Well, dogs, they can't speak English, right? But when you're playing with them, you can still tell when they're happy. You can tell when they're sad. You can tell when they're angry. You can even tell when they're hungry and give them food. But how can you tell all of that when you can't even communicate with them by like talking to them? Well, you might not have thought about it, but you can learn a lot about what an animal needs. You can learn a lot about what an animal wants by the way it acts and its body language and its behavior. And just like that's true for your pets, it's exactly the same for wild animals. So if you were to meet this cheetah, what mood would you think it's in? Is it happy? Is it angry? Is it aggressive? Yeah, you wouldn't say it's happy. You would probably say it's defensive or maybe a little bit aggressive. And that's just from one picture. Imagine all of the information that you could get if you were watching it in person or you had a video of it, if you could see its movements, if you could hear the sounds it was making. So by watching these animals and looking at how they act under different conditions, we can learn a lot about them. We can learn why they do the things that they do. We can learn about what they need to survive. And then we can use that information to help us to make decisions on what we need to do to protect those animals. Now, that kind of sounds a bit vague. So I want to give you an example of a scenario where understanding animal behavior might help. So let's imagine a fictional land. And it's a place where animals and people have coexisted for years. And it's a place where there's relatively little conflict between them. But then the climate starts to change. It starts to get hotter, starts to get drier. And the places where the animals once went for water, well, they start to disappear. So in response, the animals change their behaviors. They start to move closer and closer to the people. And they do that to get access to water. And as they move into these new areas, they start to damage the people's homes, they start to eat their food, and they even injure the people. So let's imagine that you are in charge of this village or you're a member of the government. What's the right move? Do you kill the animals? Do you pay people for the damages that they're sustaining? Or do you tell people just to deal with it themselves? It's a super complicated situation, and there's not a single easy decision that you can make. But if you understand animal behavior and you understand why these new conflicts are happening, it can help you to make plans that benefit both people and the animals. So for example, if in this case you understood that the animals were moving to these new areas in order to access water, you might decide to make human-made water sources in the locations that those animals were before, so that those animals move back again. And you get that spatial separation between animals and people, and the conflict reduces. And although this is based on this fictional land, scenarios like this are happening in the study area where me and my team work. So this is a place where climate change is impacting how animals and people behave. And sometimes it's having these really disastrous consequences and shifting conflict between them. And in these scenarios, although understanding animal behavior isn't going to completely solve the problems, it can still give you that information that you need to make those decisions that are beneficial to both people and planet. And that's super important because for all of these carnivores that I mentioned before, their numbers are getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And that's largely happening because of impacts that people have been having on them over the years. And so we need to do everything that we can to help conserve them. So that's why learning about animal behavior is so important. But like the question is, how do you actually go about it? Well, one of the easiest ways to learn what an animal is doing is it's pretty obvious. You just sit beside the animal and you watch it. So if you've ever been to the zoo and if you've ever just sat there and watched animals, you're basically doing exactly what me and my team do. So we watch animals as well, but we just do it in the wild. So I work with this really amazing team, lots of incredible people. And every day when it's still dark, we'll wake up, we'll get into our cars, we'll find animals, and then we'll stay with them all day. So from the minute the sun comes up to the minute the sun goes down, we'll just sit there with that animal. And it takes a lot of time to watch animals in this way and understand what they're doing, but it's a really, really great way to learn about them. And one of the things that makes this so valuable is that every individual that we're watching looks different. So it's not just two lions that you can see here, two random lions. This is Lutetsi and Luwapi. And so it becomes more about, just generally what are the animals doing, but what are those individuals doing? And understanding that not all animals behave the same is super important in animal behavior. So just like each of you have your own individual personalities and respond differently to different scenarios, animals do exactly the same. So I've been talking for a while, so I kind of want to give you a chance to exercise your brains. So I want to give you a quick lesson on how you tell animals apart within a particular group. And then I'm going to give you a quiz. So how do you tell individuals apart from the same species? That's what you're going to learn. For hyenas, leopards, wild dogs, and cheetahs, it's relatively easy. So if you look at these pictures here, you can tell that they have these distinctive body patterns. For cheetahs, it's these black marks. For wild dogs, it's this 3-color pattern. And then for the other animals, they've got these unique spotty style patterns. And you can use these patterns effectively like fingerprints to tell them apart, because different individuals within each of these species will have different patterns on their body. And if you study them enough, you can get to a stage where you just look at an animal, you immediately see the pattern that tells them apart and makes them unique, and you can tell just from a quick glance who it is. So let's put this into practice. Here we have the body of a handsome leopard called Goose. And then here we have an unknown leopard. So remember, we use the patterns on their body to tell them apart, sort of like spot the difference. So the question is the unknown leopard in the bottom right Goose, or is it a different animal? So I'm going to give you about 30 seconds. Take a look at the picture and see if you can tell whether this is a new leopard or whether it's Goose. All right, I'm going to give you the answer. So, is the leopard Goose? Yes, it's Goose. If you identified as Goose, 5 stars. If you didn't, it's fine. It's super hard. Practice makes perfect. So, I've marked on there the body patterns that I use to tell Goose apart from other leopards when I see them. So, as soon as I see a picture of Goose, my eyes just zoom into those areas that I've highlighted, and I can tell them apart quite easily. So those body patterns make it relatively easy when it comes to animals like leopards to tell them apart, but it becomes a bit trickier for lions. And that's because lions don't have unique body patterns. So you can see this lion here, completely same coloration on it. So if you just looked at their fur, you wouldn't be able to tell lion A apart from lion B. So what you use for lions instead is the whisker spots. So their whisker patterns are different between different groups of lions, the same way that body patterns for leopards are different between leopards. And what you're specifically looking at is the top 2 rows of whisker spots. So I've marked them there with that arrow. So these top 2 rows will be different between different individual lions. So again, a quiz. This lion is Achilles. And then we have an unknown lion in the bottom right. So is the new unknown lion Achilles, or is it a different lion? So again, look at the 2 top rows of the whisker spots and see if you can tell it apart. And I'll give you about 10 seconds. So the answer is that it's not Achilles. So it's a lot more difficult with lions to tell them apart because those whisker spots are such a small area and it can be really difficult to see patterns in them. If you didn't get it, hard luck. I find it tough to identify lions as well. So this is how you tell carnivores apart. And I think it's a super useful skill to have because next time you're watching a wildlife documentary, you'll be able to tell if they're trying to trick you by showing you 2 different leopards and saying it's the same one, which I can't get past now every time I watch them. So anyway, watching these animals in the wild is a really great way to understand how they behave. But it can also be challenging for a lot of different reasons. Sometimes the animals are really difficult to find or to see. So they could be in areas that have lots of trees. They could be in areas that have got really tall grass, or they could be in areas that are just super, super wet. So this is a picture of when I drove into a flooded road when I was trying to look for a leopard and got stuck. And it kind of like shows you the challenges that you have when you're working in the field with these animals. We're out there by ourselves and we're trying to find them and trying to get out of messes like this. So this particular scenario took me 3 hours to get out of, and I had to crawl around a lot in the mud. So another way that we can watch animals and learn what they're doing is by using cameras. So we could put cameras by the side of the roads and then use those cameras to take pictures when an animal walks past, or to take videos when an animal walks past. And this is a really sneaky and great way to learn about animal behaviors, because when those animals think they're completely alone, when they think that no one's watching them, we can see exactly what they get up to. So for example, did you know that a lot of animals will use pee and other body odors to send messages to each other? This is a video from a camera that we put out that shows a lion leaving some of its juice on a bush, so that when other animals go past, it can smell it and it can see exactly that that lion was there. It can get an idea of who it was, how long it was since they were there, and a whole loads of other information. And so these scent marks, these odors that they leave in the environment, are sort of like the animal equivalent of a signpost. Cameras are also a great way to learn funny things about animals as well. So I only recently learned that when a cat falls, they'll nearly always land on their feet. And the thing that inspired me to look into this was a video of my favorite leopard climbing into a tree. So this is Roll. And then I love at the end how he just looks around and pretends it didn't happen. So learning about animal behavior is all about understanding what animals are doing. And the easiest way to do that is just to sit there and watch them. So I want to give you some homework. The next time you go to the park, or you go to the zoo, or you're with your pet, just take a seat, sit there, watch what the animal's doing, and see if you can understand why they're doing the things that they do. And if you can do that, you're basically doing exactly what I do for my work. Okay, so that's all I have to say. I want to thank you for your attention, and I'm ready for any questions that you might have now. Thanks.
Wonderful. Okay, we will end with one of the questions that we ask all of our explorers here is, Kasim, how can we take on your mission and help wildlife in our own communities?
Yeah, cool. So first of all, thank you everyone for your questions. They're all super great. And that's also a very good final question. So I think one of the things is to just take a moment, observe animals in the places that you are, and think about how human activities are impacting those animals. Look at how their behaviors change when people come close to them, when they think they're alone. And then think about the different ways that you yourself or your families or your communities could change how you act in order to help those animals. And I think just understanding that connection between people and animals and how we can change their behavior is really, really important, because a lot of times when we're in these natural environments and we see animals, we don't necessarily look at their behaviors and tell us what those animals are feeling or thinking or what they might need. So I think that's a really good initial place to start. And it's a really good way to see if you might be interested in studying animal behavior or like a wildlife science type role, because it's essentially exactly what I do, but it's just in a different place.
Awesome. And maybe you could give us a reminder of our homework assignment.
Yes. So your homework would be go anywhere where there's an animal. So it could be a wild park. It could be your backyard. It could be just with your cats in your house. Just watch them. Look at their behaviors, look at how they act, and look how that changes in different times. And just try and connect the things that they're doing with why they might be doing them and what they're trying to achieve by doing them. And yeah, it will just give you a chance to experience animals in a lot of the same ways that I do.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Kasim, and thank you, students and teachers, for joining us today. Thank you. Thank you. I hope you join many more of our events. Next week, we'll join explorer Frederique Farden to learn all about mangroves. So you can register your student group for a shout out during the event and a chance to be on screen with us at natgeoed.org/explorer classroom. I hope everyone has a great day.